All right. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'll start briefly with some logistics. All attendees are automatically muted and have video disabled. Please submit your questions in the chat box and ensure that they are visible to all attendees. And we'll be monitoring those throughout and have lots of time left for Q&A afterward. Thanks to those of you who already submitted some questions for our speaker. I will keep my introduction brief because I don't want to devote time to the presentation and the Q&A. This webinar is hosted by the Measurement and Data Working Group of the Women's Financial Inclusion Community of Practice, which is facilitated by CCAP, myself, Yasmin bin Humam, and Dina Bourgeorgi. It's the second in our series on gender disaggregated data in financial inclusion. Our first one was held September 27th to introduce some of the data sets that exist out there. And today we are doing a deep dive into the global Findex. And I hope you come away with a sense for how you can segment the women's demographic using the Findex data and other data collected on the same survey instrument, and also what use cases the data can provide. We can't give you all possible combinations in this webinar, but I really hope you come away inspired to download and use the data. For those of you intimidated by that prospect, please reach out to the Data and Measurement Working Group of the Community of Practice, and we'll try to do some learning around that. Our speaker is well known among many of you. Leora Clapper is lead economist at the World Bank and founder of the Global Findex. She's one of the most passionate advocates for women's financial inclusion. She's laughing across me, but she really is. And I truly believe that her rigor of analysis is helping to get the message to new audiences in this space. So with that, I will hand over to Leora.
Thank you, Yasmin and CCAP, for organizing this webinar. A special thanks to those of you who have woken up early, staying up late to join us. I really hope this will be collaborative. I sincerely appreciate all questions and comments. It's feedback from many of you by email, by Twitter, that really improved our analysis and dissemination of the data. I'm going to talk for about 25 minutes, briefly go through why demand-side data is special, why we need this to complement other data sources, a few minutes just showing you how to download the data, and the slides will be available after the presentation if you wish to go through them more carefully with the detailed instructions. And then finally, a little bit about what's new and forthcoming. And this also gets back to the role of demand-side data. As I like to say, when we first wrote this question in 2010, we hadn't yet dreamed up some of the products we're now asking questions on. And so the Findex questionnaire has evolved in order to allow policymakers and practitioners today to design better policies and design better products to serve women's financial needs. I'm sorry. There we go.
And I understand some people are having problems with the audio. Please continue to send messages if you experience audio problems.
Thank you.
And we'll look into that.
And so very broadly, 2009, 2010, there's growing interest and awareness of the importance of financial services, both access and usage of these services, especially by women. And the only data we had, though, is mostly supply-side data. It was data presented to regulators directly from financial institutions. The problem with that data is one of the questions we already received, asked about, is that, first of all, it only gives us a snapshot of the formal sector. So we don't know, we know that especially the poor, make many financial transactions thinking about their financial future. However, most of these transactions are happening in the informal sector, whether they're saving informally, borrowing informally, and we want to capture that information as well to understand where there's the greatest need for the design of better, cheaper, more affordable, safer formal products. And then there were some very good demand-side surveys of individuals, but for select markets. We had FinScope in Africa, for example. So what we really wanted was a global, comparable, harmonized database of financial inclusion. And so with funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and in close partnership with Gallup, developed the Global Findex questionnaire in 2010. We've now published 2 rounds of data and are very excited that the 3rd round of 2017 data is currently being collected over this calendar year, hopefully in over 150 countries, and will be published in April at the World Bank IMF spring meetings. Yes.
Leora, sorry, I'm going to pause you right there because it looks like there are sound issues for some of our participants. So we're going to take 2 minutes just to quickly disconnect and reconnect the audio, which I hope will help. And thanks to those of you on the line for your patience. So what I will do, if you just wait a moment, is I will disconnect this audio. Hello, everyone. We've reconnected to audio, and hopefully the quality is better this time. I'll also work on making sure that the chats go to all participants instead of all panelists. But on that note, Leora, I hand it back to you, and note to the audience that I will be monitoring your comments.
Okay, so before I get into the exciting opportunities of technology, I'm glad ours is working. So as I was saying, we care about demand-side data because it allows us the fuller menu of financial options of products, both formal and informal. But secondly, and most importantly, supply-side data is traditionally a black box. Banks provide to regulators the number of accounts, but we don't know who has those accounts, whether it's women, whether it's the income of those adults, et cetera. And so what the Findex has offered us is a global perspective on accounts measured from the users of financial services based on over 150,000 interviews with adults in over 140 countries worldwide. And so what's important to, So it's important when designing a demand-side questionnaire to always have in mind how, A, what are the questions you want to answer in advance, and B, to make sure that every question is relevant and important, and understand how you'll use the data. And so we set out with the goal of understanding, how can we design better policies and products for women? How can we, who are the unbanked? Who, are they women? Are they single? Are they married? What age are they? What's their employment? And again, this is important information for policymakers and researchers trying to expand financial inclusion, especially for women. And so just to ground us in why the data has been so useful, is marrying rigorous academic research that's been finding that simply offering a woman an account, place to save money in her own, receive and send money, and save money in her own name, has a significant impact on household spending, on nutritious food, on education, on health care, on the purchase of goods that matter most to women. And so before getting to this data, let me just mention how we define account ownership. We define it as an account at a formal, regulated financial institution that can be used to store money and to send and receive payments. Notably, we have support from World Bank offices in over 70 countries who can see for us a simple Excel file with the names of all institutions in their countries which are regulated. And we ask in the questionnaire, which is tailored by country, we're thinking about accounts at a bank, at a microfinance institution, at a savings cooperative, a rural savings cooperative, depending on the list on the sample of institutions in that country which are regulated by a financial regulator. And that's how we define formal financial institution. In terms of goals, so this data is now used for the World Bank's Universal Financial Access goal of universal financial inclusion by 2020. I have been on my soapbox for many years preaching the importance that it's not enough for household level account ownership, but that we really care about individual level account ownership. That by focusing, there are still many countries who contact us on a regular basis. My World Bank colleagues will often say, isn't an account a luxury good? Not every household needs a Mercedes. Why are we asking poor households to spend money on an expensive luxury good? Accounts generally often aren't free in developing countries. Why should they waste their hard-earned money on a second account when the household already has one? And the reason we keep giving them, based again on the data, on the research, is that the goal is not for the household to use, for other members of the household to use an account of often the male household head, but rather giving a woman her own account in her own name, a place to save money, gives her greater privacy, security, and control over her money. And so we define, again, account ownership as an account at a regulated financial institution, a safe place where she can use to store money, send and receive payments, and the goal to be that every individual, every adult has an account, and not simply every household. So in developing countries, on average, we find about a 9 percentage point gap between men and women in account ownership, but that masks some bigger differences. For example, in 2014, in India, we found that men were twice as likely as women to have an account. And as policies over the past 3 years have been designed with the intent to bring more women into the formal financial sector, whether it be digitizing government transfer payments, offering simple, no-fee, no-balance accounts, we hope to see a narrowing of the gap around the world. And so here again, how do digital payments help women? There's, again, a strong literature showing that the security, privacy, confidentiality, that from the spender it's cheaper, more convenient, and as well as certainly for the recipient. We also find evidence that it helps with financial resilience, that people who have access to digital payment channels are more likely, for example, to get help when in need. So let me give 4 slides examples of different ways of slicing the data. So in this figure, the height of the bar is the share of adults with an account. So for the sample of BRICS countries or Mexico, we're looking at the height of the bar is the percentage who are banked. These are women. And we're showing here what percentage of those who have an account are using their account to receive private wages into the account, to receive government transfers into the account, or to receive public wages into their accounts. As shown in this bar, for example, in Mexico, which is pretty reflective of Latin America more generally, accounts are very often used. Over half of accounts in Latin America are used to receive some sort of payment. Similarly in South Africa, whereas in India, there's still tremendous opportunities for greater usage of these accounts, at least to receive a payment. We have a further question in the Findex on this account. If you use your account to receive, for example, your wage payments, well, one question we ask is, do you typically withdraw the full amount on payday, or do you leave it in and use your account more over time? Gives a little bit of a smell for cash management over the month. We also ask a question, did you receive that money into a new account open for the purpose of receiving that payment? To try to get, again, a sense of the marginal contribution of digitizing these payments. And again, we're finding 1 in 10 banked adults in developing countries open their first account in order to receive one of these payments, suggesting tremendous potential of digitizing these payments. So now let's move to a different way of slicing the data. Not to confuse you, it's to show you different ways that we can normalize the data. Here at the height of the bar are adults who report women that report receiving a government transfer payment. This could be a conditional cash transfer, employment payment, etc. And so first thing to note is that in general, developing countries, there aren't many lower income countries don't pay a lot of adult transfer payments. So for example, here in Mexico, about 20%, in Brazil, about 20% of adults report receiving government transfer payments. And the blue bars, both the dotted and the solid blue bars, are the percent of those adults who report receiving it directly into an account at a bank or mobile money service account or other formal financial institution. In Brazil, for example, almost 90% of adults who report receiving government transfer payments report receiving it directly into an account, suggesting that the government's policy and goal to digitize government transfer payments has been successful. We also see remarkably from the dotted bar that half of those adults open their first account in order to receive that payment. And this is, again, another way of looking at the data. Mexico, for example, it's interesting and notable, I think, that even though the Mexican government has committed to fully digitizing their own disbursement of government transfer payments, we still see a big chunk who report receiving in cash. And that's because in Mexico, and this is, reforms are happening, at least in 2014, often the government would make payments to a bank which didn't have its footprint, didn't have enough of a rural reach, and then the bank would make cash payments to the ultimate recipient. And so, again, that's marrying the supply and demand side data. We know from the supply side that the Mexican government, for example, is making all transfers electronically to banks, but we also want to know the perspective of the recipient. Are they receiving it in cash or directly into an account? Again, this data can be used to highlight opportunities. For example, over 160 million unbanked adults receive a government transfer or public wage payment in cash. Here's something that the government can do to take action to expand financial inclusion among the underserved. Here again, different way of slicing the data. Here at the height of the bar, percentage of adults to receive a private sector wage payment. Here, potentially, the opportunities might be bigger. We have more adults receiving these private sector payments in cash globally. Almost 280 million unbanked adults receive a private sector wage payment in cash. And so here a question again, how can we design payroll accounts, commercially viable accounts, accounts that can reach rural workers, less literate, less financially capable workers in a sustainable way. So let me also talk about some other ways you can cross-tab the data. This is the employment. We released our contract with Gallup allows us to release publicly limited 5 limited covariates per individual. But our micro data, we release the complete Findex database plus gender, age, income, education, rural versus urban residency. However, many universities have available the complete Gallup World Polls. It's also made available for Findex users at reduced fee. And there you can get into really nitty-gritty employment questions. And so this should be some broader categories here. I was interested in looking at for men versus for women, A, employment distribution, And so the shaded pieces of the pie are the distribution of workers who report being wage employed, self-employed out of the workforce. And with each of those categories, what are the percentage of men versus women who are banked? And so, for example, I would see the takeaway here that among wage workers, or even really self-employed, we don't see that big a gender gap, right? We see a big gender gap is among those who are out of the workforce. It may be that men have an account simply for household financing, or maybe for return of business, which we'll talk about in a few slides. But for women, so here's a challenge. And then furthermore, we start looking at who are the unbanked. We see that most adults who remain unbanked in 2014 were women, and a lot of them were out of the workforce. And so again, better understanding what are the financial transactions that these women do. Are they saving under the mattress? Are they borrowing for credit? And how can we work to, for example, offer more convenient, affordable digital payments, which will allow them to build a credit history, to allow them to save money in a safer way. We also will be adding this year to the database data that we collected in 2014 alongside the Findex data that was funded by S&P Financial, which was 4 questions on very basic understanding of interest compounding, this idea that interest grows over time, on inflation, on discounting. And so here's a good example of how not to use the data. It may be very tempting to simply look, what is the financial literacy of those who have an account versus those that don't have an account? And as you'd expect, it's far lower for those who are unbanked. You can't draw any conclusions from that. There's so much else going on, right? So people who are unbanked also are more likely to be poorer, less educated, perhaps live in rural areas, had never seen a bank before, didn't have parents who had bank accounts. There's a lot of other stuff going on. And so, we caution against drawing, confusing causality and correlations. However, one thing we can bite off of the data is really interesting for is just adults who reported using credit in the past year, okay? So these are people who borrowed in the past year or who used a credit card, just among those people. And this is looking at the G7 countries. We're still finding huge gaps of people, percentage of adults, who couldn't answer basic questions of interest compounding. And that's highlighting a risk. If interest rates were to suddenly increase, these are the people who are at risk. We also can look at technology, okay? And so according to GSMA in 2014, the global gender gap in mobile phone ownership was about 200 million women behind men, although we hope that gap has narrowed in the past couple of years. Not only are we interested in phone ownership, we're also interested in whether the phone is internet-enabled. Increasingly, apps and smartphones, internet-enabled technology is being used to deliver financial services. And so, for example, in Turkey, only 57% of women report having a mobile phone as well as access to the internet versus over 75% of men. And this is a gap we need to keep our eyes at. In South Asia, women are half as likely as men to report having internet access in their home. Assuming the men and women are living in the same home, that's saying that the woman either doesn't have access to the man's internet-enabled phone or doesn't have access to the internet in the home. And so because of this, which I'll talk about in a few moments, we actually added to 2017 questions specifically on, do you personally have a phone? And this is also clearly, going back to the list of initial questions, how many unbanked adults report, or unbanked women report having a personal phone? And there lies the opportunities to deliver them financial services via the phone. So let me take 2 minutes to just very quickly just run through with you how to download the data. My big and exciting news, we are getting rid of the data portal because of complaints from people like you. This seems to have been a difficult, cumbersome way of downloading data. Going forward in 2017, we will have country pages where you can download the data by country in Excel. It will be more of you will still be able to download the data through the World Bank's Open Data World Development Indicator database. However, all the Findex data will also be available in Excel spreadsheets to download directly from our website. But this will run through the data portal, which is the way to download the data until April. You click the Data tab on the left. You click, for example, country-level data. You have the option to either have the data already weighted and using individual weights by country for all indicators, This brings you to the World Bank Data Bank, where data still will be available for those who wish to download the data through the data bank. You choose your countries, you choose your series. This has been hopefully not confusing, and we will try to simplify this going forward. We have two waves of data, 2011, 2014, which are not identical. Again, it was a combination of questions that we realized we made a mistake, that were not asked perfectly in 11, that we improved and corrected, as well as simply new questions, a large module on payments, which was added in 2014. And then there are a number of series which are TS, a time series, which we'll be adding to in 2017. And 2017 will have many indicators, for example, that only on payments that provide this time series between 2014 and 2017. You choose your years. MRV, simply most recent data. In Findex, all data in this case would be 14. And then you click your download options. You can choose between Excel, Stata, and various other ways of downloading the data. For those who are more ambitious and comfortable in Stata and other software, you can also download the data, the microdata. All 150,000 observations are, well now, over 300,000 observations are available on our website. You click on the micro, this is also, Findex was the most popular database in the microdata library, so we are excited that people are using the microdata for research and other purposes. So you click on microdata, click the country you want, you can search by country. The data can be downloaded by country or for the entire 150,000 data observations in global. You then get to choose your variables. You can choose specific variables or download all variables. And finally, you can decide how, by country, decide how you want the data in what format. The microdata is free, but you do have to register. Simply click I agree, and then you receive access to all data. Okay, 2017. It'll take a few minutes to go through this, but it's new and exciting, looking forward. We have a trend. We're all excited, and it's anticipation as to how close we are to reaching our goal of universal financial access. And then beyond that, not only access, but are people using the accounts? Not only do we want to see big growth in account ownership, we also want to see growth in usage of those accounts for payments, for savings, and others. So first, time series update on mobile money. 2014 was the first attempt to collect data on use of mobile money service accounts. This is really hard to ask. True story, I was in Ghana. It was our first stop in a global tour. We've had the pleasure to pilot this questionnaire, sitting in people's homes in over 30 countries around the world, which is critical in developing a demand-side survey, asking people the questions open-ended, making sure we weren't missing any ways that people were making payments, and most importantly, making sure people understood the question. We asked a guy, have you made any payments using your phone? He said, yes, I called my wife to purchase milk. He was dead serious, and I went home and cried. And so by our first stop in Africa, we were in Kenya or Tanzania, I finally said to the guy, do you have an Orange account? He said, well, yeah, I do. And then that is why, if you look at the Global Findex questionnaire, we collaborate with GSMA. For every questionnaire, we ask by name the name of the mobile money service product. And we also want to know about personal use. We want to know from your own phone. And so the question is worded, have you personally made a payment from your phone using your Orange account? And we believe the data is very good. And it's robust to other demand-side surveys as well as GSMA data. So in 2014, we really only saw the use of mobile money service accounts in sub-Saharan Africa. We're anxious to see has it spread beyond. How has it explicitly helped in terms of accounts narrowing the gap, the gender gaps, the income gaps between the use of accounts by wealthy and poor adults. We're also interested in looking more carefully. So, for example, in countries that saw big growth in mobile money accounts ownership in 2014, Cote d'Ivoire, more adults had mobile money service accounts and bank accounts. Are we seeing a catch-up? Are we seeing these people now also using bank accounts? We can look on the micro individual level on the usage of both mobile and bank accounts. New data on phone and internet. So here, as I mentioned earlier, increasingly access to technology is a key component of access to financial services. And so we'll have data on, do you personally have a phone? Have you personally used it in the past 6 months? you personally have access to the internet in your home? Have you used it in the last 7 days? I'm sorry, the phone calls this past 7 days. It, again, reveal interesting ways, opportunities. How many unbanked adults have a mobile phone? How many unbanked adults receive a government transfer, have a phone and receive a government transfer payment in cash? It help us, really design on a local level that targets the unbanked populations where we see these opportunities. Next, new payment questions. So for example, we will fully admit I was quite excited in 2014 at the numbers we were seeing, for example, in China, people who told me they made purchases over the internet. When I went to China and talked to the people, I asked, how did you pay? What payment method did you use to pay for these purchases? And, too many people replied, well, I paid cash upon delivery. So we added a question. Now, if you say you made a purchase over using your phone or the internet, you can ask a subsequent question. Did you pay for it over the phone or internet, or did you pay for it in cash? And so again, this is a market opportunity. Seeing people who are able to leverage technology to make more convenient and safe purchases, helping them go that last mile to make the purchase online as well. And then again, more other questions revised slightly. Do you pay bills on time? And do you make most exciting, merchant payments. So we had questions on how to receive wage payments, government transfer payments, remittance payments. We have now added a whole module on, are you self-employed? How do you receive payments? What's interesting here also is we can slice that by income, by gender, but also we have other information in Galbraith Cole on business ownership, formal business ownership, so at least we can get a sense for how deep is the penetration of merchant acceptances. And then last two, with funding from the AXA Foundation, we went around the world to develop a new module on risk management, specifically the use of insurance. For reasons I won't go into now, but I'm happy to talk about offline. Life insurance, health insurance, we just simply were not convinced was comparable across countries. They're so country specific. However, our module on agricultural risk management, are you engaged in livestock or crops, worked really nicely across country, and specifically on the use of weather-based insurance. We will know, how many adults suffered climate-related losses, how many received compensation, how adults are working in agriculture, in the agricultural sector, engaged in agriculture, think about managing their risk. We're piloting this in 2017 in 36 countries, the UFA, the largest 25 developing countries, plus an additional 6 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And finally, in collaboration with our ID4D colleagues, something incredibly important for expanding financial inclusion is financial identification. Which I would argue strongly is both important for access and usage of bank accounts as well as increasingly technology, mobile accounts for the same KYC purposes. Generally, you need to have a SIMS card in your own name to get a mobile money service account. A SIMS card requires financial identification. And so we added 3 questions. Actually, a major contribution, which we will provide online, is simply we collected the name of the national ID card or number in every country. So we asked explicitly, do you have an Aadhaar number, for example? We'll know plenty of adults who have that identification, and we'll know the gender gaps, we'll know the income gaps. Well, then the follow-up question simply asking, have you ever used your identification to access separately a financial service, a mobile service, a government service, or a government payment? And for those who don't have ID, in many countries, you still have low identification rates. A better understanding, I don't need it, I have other identification, versus other barriers such as cost or documentation, or I simply don't know how. So we're very excited, very busy, very anxious about the 2017 data, which I hope we'll have the opportunity to come back and talk to you about in the spring. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leora, and thanks to our participants. I realize some of them are having audio issues, but we will make this recording available after the fact, and we'll do our best to enhance and overlay audio where necessary. I wanted to highlight for our participants that use of the Findex data, it's not, use of Findex, it's not, as we learned from the it's not constrained to the Findex findings and the Findex outcomes, but you can also see how Findex asks their questions and what they're asking questions about. And so this can really give participants insights into how they approach these topics with the populations that they serve. And they would encourage them not just to look at the data, but also to look at the questionnaires and to really think about, why it's Findex chosen to ask these questions, which leads me actually to one of the questions that we received from Net Hope about, and I'll read it. I'll read out two questions and then turn to Leora for a response. The first question is, as the Findex is used in secondary research by so many people who don't have capacity to carry out research on such a large scale themselves, the survey questions have significant impact on the boundaries of dialogue in the development community. For example, how account ownership is defined becomes the way that account ownership is viewed by practitioners in the field. So how does Findex think broadly and strategically about its role in setting the terms of this dialogue? And I will actually add to that question, when Findex conducts its pilots, how transparent and participatory is that process? Would Findex release the findings from pilots to others before it then delves into fine-tuning the questions for the Findex questionnaires going forward? And how is that transition made from pilot findings to questionnaire? And what opportunity is there for others to learn about that thought process as it's ongoing? The second question, the first question. Yeah, okay, go ahead, Leora, and then I'll turn to the others.
So thank you for the question. So this is absolutely a collaboration. We have a technical advisory board of external people, of internal colleagues, and absolutely it's been a collaboration. In terms of the setting of terms, that's a great question. I mean, my role, I'm from the research department, is to help my colleagues develop evidence-based policy. And so, for example, the decision not to include, let's say semi-formal financial institutions, like if a woman belongs to a ROSCA, is she financially included? And with the goal that, our goal is to keep the money safe, safe and within and transparent. The decision was made to limit it to formal financial sector institutions, with the goal, of course, in many countries of improving the safety and transparency of these financial institutions. But that was a definition developed with my colleagues and is identical to the UFA definition, for example. In terms of pilots, to be clear, these are cognitive interviews. So it's not that we pilot 100 people and then go back and analyze the data. It's that literally sitting in people's homes, 5, 6 adults a day, and asking them these questions open-ended. How do you, if you need to purchase something, how do you purchase it? The bigger picture, if you had a health emergency, how would you get the money? And often it's not something that can be codified, 1, 2, 3. Often it's a combination of features. It's it's interesting. The New York Times recently had an article talking about how in Alaska people have what's called a cakewalk, that they throw parties where they make these cake mixes to raise money for a health emergency. It's the same story we heard in Latin America where people throw chicken parties, where they buy cheap, inexpensive chicken and throw a party, and people come with the understanding that I'm going to contribute money today because when I have my emergency, people will contribute to me later. And so, understanding, these kind of interviews help us better understand the data, help us understand what we consider mysteries or irrational behavior by people in their decision-making, people who use formal and informal services, simply because the formally provided services aren't well designed for, daily savings of $1 or less. And so, all of these cognitive interviews help us in both better asking the questions, make sure we're not missing anything, to help us better interpret the data, and to help us and our colleagues, better design policies.
Mm-hmm. So this actually leads then into the next question we received from a researcher who asked, would you recommend using the Findex data to study women's savings, formal and informal? And from what I'm understanding from you, Findex it's focused on formal sector and use of formal financial services. That's where, you know, the industry is channeling a lot of the efforts. But many people active in this space have been working with informal savings groups and such institutions for the past 20 years. And so how can Findex, you know, obviously you get a lot of insights from these cognitive questions asked in the pilots, but then how can Findex better perhaps leverage these findings on the informal sector, on chicken parties, on informal saving mechanisms, and those kinds of dynamics?
So there are explicit questions on the use of informal products. And that's the key. I hope a key takeaway from this presentation is that a key benefit of demand-side data is that you're able to ask questions and collect data on financial activity outside the formal financial sector, because that's what poor adults are using for the most part. And so we want to know, have you saved any money in the past year? Yes. Did you save using a bank? No. Did you save using community savings? When we use, again, leveraging my wonderful colleagues around the world, one of the questions we have in this Excel spreadsheet, in addition to the list of formal financial institutions, is what's the local vernacular for a ROSCA, for a SUSU, for informal savings groups, any interesting way that people save informally. The same goes with credit. Did you borrow in the past year? Did you use a bank? No. Did you use family or friends? Did you borrow store credit? Did you borrow from an employer? We delve into these alternative sources to understand how much people are, really to highlight the importance of these other channels for people's financial resilience, and understanding what they're currently doing, because that's the best way to design the appropriate products for, hopefully help adults move to safer, cheaper, and more convenient financial services.
Yeah, no, and I think it's really great how you mentioned that the surveys are very much tailored to the local context, so you would use the local vernacular for whatever mechanisms, informal mechanisms are in place locally, and so when people download the surveys themselves, they can learn more about those dynamics.
And also, it's by defining account ownership or defining a financial inclusion as formal account ownership, either at a bank, other financial institution, or mobile money service account, it's in no way suggesting that these uses of ROSCAs and other semi-formal savings are not really, really important. The question is, but if we want people to be able to develop credit histories, saving histories, payment histories, to access future, for example, credits to invest in business or educational opportunities, we need to figure out ways of leveraging women's ability and willingness to save to also help her develop these histories, this reputational history. I also want to mention, so our original questionnaire had you save at a bank or financial institution, a semi-formal ROSCA, et cetera, or do you save at home? And we were piloting this in Africa, and when the interviewer said, do you save at home, the guy pulled out a rifle and said, why are you asking me if I have money in my house? So that's why that is the excluded category.
We have some questions here that are a bit more on the technical side regarding how the data is available for download, and the question was that data on employment, marital status, rural and urban is not easily available to the public, which makes it hard for researchers. And I imagine that is, of course, available in the micro data, the survey data, but perhaps, and I have some familiarity, but not as much as some of our participants and as much as you, obviously, but in terms of the columns that are provided on the national level data, perhaps that's not as easily filtered. Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
And also to reply, I saw a comment about data files. So first of all, please email me directly. We actually are putting up on our website now, and will be forthcoming in 2017. We will have extensive data files for using the data that we're happy to share. We share it widely. We actually write data programming all the time for people who email us that they need help using the microdata. That's our pleasure. The problem with people requesting this data coding for is I've done also use the data for some research papers, which do use other data from the core Gallup roll poll, unemployment, marital status, et cetera, which are not available in the public data release. This is, I agree, challenging. It's an unfortunate problem. The history is that, again, the way we're able to collect data for 150 countries in one calendar year is leveraging the proprietary Gallup World Poll Survey. This is, they have hundreds of people in their infrastructure collecting the data, people in teams, buildings of people in Princeton, New Jersey, and Nebraska, and regional directors and teams around the world. However, this is the Gallup's proprietary product. And so we were able to negotiate to make publicly available 5 key demographic variables, but the other variables are Gallup's proprietary data. What we have done, for example, is we've coded so that if you have access to Gallup's database, you can match it as a World Bank ID included in, for example, the academic release of the Gallup World Poll data, which most universities today have access to, which allow you to easily match the data with the Findex microdata. We also are in the process of working with Gallup to make available for a nominal fee a larger database with an additional, 20 or so demographic characteristics. So that will be it's in the pipeline.
Yeah, and perhaps this is something for our community of practice to bring up as well, letting people know, what else is included in the Gallup survey that does the Findex survey, where they can access, these additional data sets that are so complementary to Findex, and, who to reach out to Gallup regarding costs and so forth. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll probably wrap up unless something burning comes in over the chat to all panelists. But going back to your slide about women out of the workforce and their disproportionate lack of accounts, I think it's an intuitive finding. You could almost guess at that, but it's important to have the numbers behind it and to realize the scale of the problem. And just some personal recommendations from you on kind of next steps after someone has a finding like that in terms of additional insights they might try to glean from the Findex data or from other data sources that you know of that speak to how to solve that problem.
No, great question. So again, a challenge of working with Findex is the sample size is small, right? So it's nationally representative. It's amazingly consistent with larger databases like Athena in Nigeria, which survey over 20,000 adults. Findex data for 1,000 adults in Nigeria is almost spot on the past 2 rounds. However, given that's only 1,000 observations, and you don't want to aggregate data with less than 100 observations, which means if less than 10% of adults do something, it's not statistically rigorous to aggregate. Again, to challenges. So, for example, if you only want to look at women who are unbanked and receive a government transfer payment in Nigeria, the numbers are likely too small. But we are looking at that on a regional basis, certainly on a global developing country basis. So, for example, women who are out of the workforce, who are unbanked, out of the workforce, what financial transactions are they doing, sending and receiving? Are they receiving government transfer payments? Are they paying school fees in cash? Are they receiving remittance payments in cash? And all of those examples are helping us, to understand, how they're currently transacting in their current financial transactions, and how we can make those more affordable and convenient by developing the right product.
And we're coming up on time here, so I just want to wrap up with a quick thank you to Leora. We're looking forward to release of the new data set, which will not just have the previous Findex questions, but the host of additional questions and topics that Leora outlined. That will be in April of 2018. Sorry?
And please follow us on Twitter.
Follow the Global Findex on Twitter for these updates. At the next release, there'll be a big party at Leora's house we're all invited to, which I just made up right now, but we'll do something for sure. And with that, I'll just turn it over to you, Leora, in case you have any closing comments or asks of our audience.
Thank you. Follow us on Twitter. We're going to have a big surprise for the 2,000th person to follow us, where we provide a lot of this information regular for additional publications and such. And please feel free to email us. I personally look at comments that we receive because it gives us suggestions on how to improve our dissemination, improve our analysis. And so thank you very much for joining today.
All right, and I'll look forward to the party. Thank you, Leora, and thank you to all of our attendees. I will leave the chat window open for just a few more minutes in case people think of questions over the next minute or so, and we can perhaps follow up with them later, either bilaterally or in some of the follow-up that we do to this webinar. Thank you.